Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Advancement Center and welcome to the world of magic and miracles. And I'm excited to start reading The Magic of Life, Volume 2 by Robert Young. It's a smaller book, shorter, but it'll fill in the rest of the story. So I start today with Chapter 1. Bill woke suddenly and looked around the room. His eyes were reluctant to stay open, and everything seemed to be blurred or out of focus. He sat up, rubbed his eyes solidly, and looked again, but still could not focus. A sense of panic filled his mind as he heard the familiar voice of Simeon. "Bill, you are safe. The sensation will pass and your vision will return." This intense panic was something that he hadn't experienced for a long time. He stayed underwater too long on one of his dives and remembered that he had to relax completely to let the panic subside and allow him to drift to the surface. Bill relaxed, and the panic quickly disappeared, leaving the familiar feeling of Simeon's presence. The confusion of the sudden awakening left Bill's mind in such a state yet that he had little control, and as his struggle subsided, he found himself laying back down on the bed and feeling the comfort in Simeon's words. "Bill, at this very moment, there are arrangements being made for you to go overseas with your family. The people making the arrangements have acted on my word, and the overall plan will come together very quickly. I want you to understand that some of the arrangements are a little different to what will actually happen. But for now, accept them as they are and move forward one step at a time with no fixed expectation. I will be speaking to Suzanne soon, but the most important thing at the moment is our conversation. It's only an hour or so before the activity starts, and if you're not careful, you'll feel like you're being totally overloaded by circumstances. During your travels, you may feel like the focus of every person in the world has turned to you, and that is exactly what we want to happen, to take the direct focus off Suzanne. It's your support that's required to allow Suzanne to do the work that she was born to do. And as a result, you will probably find yourself in the limelight. You may wonder what we are asking of you at this stage, but all we are asking is for you to be yourself and enjoy everything that's happening, no matter what that may be, and never lose sight of the fact that your main objective is to support your family and to be a fisherman. You will be guided in every moment." Bill felt he was in another world, listening to a story about someone else, even though he knew that Simeon was directing all communication to him. He couldn't see himself as anyone but a straight fisherman and had no idea that Willem had arranged his travel and accommodation. He had a hidden feeling that made him good and so excited about everything he was doing. The thrill of the night had just passed, still lingered in his body, and all seriousness had disappeared, leaving a smile on his face that reflected his total comfort. Bill almost forgot that Simeon was present, and he certainly forgot that Simeon spoke. He was starting to drift off to somewhere else when Simeon's voice came again. "Bill, you'll have time to sleep later, but now you must remain awake. At this point, I need you to be alert. It's time to go fishing again." As soon as Bill heard Simeon's words, his eyes opened and his focus came back immediately. He looked around the room and saw everything very, very clearly. "What do you mean, Simeon? Time to go fishing?" he replied. Simeon continued, "You must return to your boat without seeing anybody in town. Then return to your family and everything will flow correctly. What about all the people who are waiting to see me tomorrow? Bill asked. Simeon replied once again, the activity has started. You have done everything you need to do, and you now need to get out of the road so that people will carry their own load instead of putting it on you. Remember that you must always be you, no matter what anybody else thinks you are. You are you. You are a fisherman. You are a family man, and you don't need to lead people to repair the damage in this town. You have already set everything in motion. Bill didn't understand what Simeon was saying, and he was about to ask some questions when Simeon simply disappeared. Bill almost laughed, and he said to himself, wow, Simeon, you really know what you're doing. You just slip out of here whenever you feel like it. I suppose my questions are a bit out of order. As his thoughts progressed, his body started moving. He was out of bed in an instant, and another part of his mind worked swiftly as he tore the blankets off Willie, who slept soundly nearby. He didn't even look back as he went towards the bathroom. What the heck are you doing, Bill? Willie cried after him. I'm on my way, Willie, Bill replied as he stuck his head under the water. I've got to get back to the boat. You had better get yourself up because you've got to get that special underway and get me back to my boat. The shock of Willie's sudden awakening shook his body and ran a shiver up his spine. He tried to talk clearly, but something wouldn't allow it. He jumped up quickly, shook himself a bit, and then yelled out again at Bill. What's going on, Bill? What are we doing? I've got a lot of things to do here. We've got a lot of things to follow up. We've got a contract to meet. Andrew will kill me if I disappear. Bill stuck his head out through the bathroom door with a big smile and said, Willie, take me home. Bill, can't you just stay while I get my business done? Willie complained. Bill smiled again. Home, Willie, he said seriously. Willie wiped his face with his hands, screwed up his eyes, and walked towards Bill. If I take you back now, everybody's going to come down on me so hard. And before Bill could say anything, he relented. I know. I can take it. Bill laughed. Willie shook his head and couldn't hold back the laughter himself. And, well, we're a bit alike, I suppose, Willie said in between laughs. I usually race out when everybody's expecting me to be here. Okay, get yourself fitted and we'll sneak out the back way. Well done. Bill quickly wiped his face and rushed over to pick up his bag. I'm ready, he said. Hang on. Can't I even go to the bathroom? Willie replied. I'm afraid not, said Bill. Not unless you're really quick. Don't worry, I'll be quick, Willie said as he disappeared into the bathroom. Bill stood tall and felt good. The adventure of the past week was okay, but he needed this time to be a fisherman, and he was really looking forward to going back to Suzanne and the children. He was just starting to think of Suzanne and to see her face when Willie appeared in front of him. Come on, he said, don't daydream, we're away. They quickly moved down the hall of the Olson Plaza, out through the fire escape, down the stairs, through the hidden corridor that took them to the kitchen, and then out into the alleyway where Willie had directed them flawlessly in the darkness the night before. Bill looked around and recognized nothing. He didn't know whether to turn left or right. Willie stretched out his arm, pulled at Bill's shirt, and with a move of his head to one side, indicated, let's go this way. Without saying a word, he walked quietly as if it was night. Bill grinned as he found himself doing exactly the same. Neither of them said a word until they got clear of the buildings. What are we being quiet about? Said Bill. Willie stopped and looked around quickly. I don't know. I think it's a habit, Willie replied. You're a character, Willie, Bill said with a laugh. I suppose I am, replied Willie. Anyway, let's go. They moved swiftly down the road until suddenly Willie looked around again and moved his eyes sideways with a slight flick of his head and suddenly ducked into a doorway that Bill immediately recognized as the entrance to the cave where Bill had been the previous night. He could never have found the cave and most certainly would not have been able to find the tunnel that Willie slipped into seconds after Bill entered the cave. Willie and Bill moved swiftly through the tunnel and soon arrived at the water where Willie's unique boat was stowed. When Bill saw the Voltage Special, his heart leapt as it did each time he saw this magic machine. It was really something special. It had the right name, but it was more than that. It seemed to have a future in his life. Bill looked forward to the thrill of the ride ahead. Willie saw Bill's eyes and said, "One day you'll drive this, but it's a little bit too much for you at the moment." Suddenly, Bill felt excited at the familiar sound of the whir of the canopy opening. Its unusual noise always caught his attention. Within a few moments, they were seated in the Special, ready to go down under the water. Bill relaxed, and as he did, the picture of Suzanne jumped straight into his mind. He felt the deep communion with Suzanne and his family. The voice of Jamie came through very clearly. "Good morning, Daddy." And Bill quickly entered that very special field of contact that he had with Jamie. "Good morning, Jamie. How's Mommy?" The conversation began. It wasn't long before Bill felt the familiar thrust of the engines. Willie had let the Voltage Special have its head, and it leapt out of the water and cut through the waves with such gentleness and power that Bill couldn't help describing it. The excitement that went through his body was immediately transmitted to Jamie and Suzanne, and he could see them smile and enjoy the sensation throughout the entire trip. As they approached the fishing boat location, Bill changed his focus to Willie, who was smiling about the enjoyment of being with Bill and his family throughout the whole trip. Willie turned to Bill. "You know, you really got something, Bill. That family of yours. I know you were talking to them. How do you do it?" "I don't know. I'd give my left arm to be able to do that." "Just get yourself a partner. It'll happen," said Bill. "Yeah, I might have to go to the other side of the world to do that, Bill," said Willie. "Well, if that's what you've got to do, that's what you've got to do, Willie," said Bill with a smile. Willie's eyes lit up and his eyebrows lifted. "You know, I might even do that, Bill." Before Bill could answer, Willie's focus quickly changed to what was in front of him, and he pulled over hard on the wheel. The boat spun to the left, skipped and jerked, and almost bounced out of the water. Willie pulled back on the throttle. "Wow, that was close," he said. Bill looked but couldn't see anything. "What was it?" Bill inquired. "I've got a porpoise friend out here, and he comes out to meet me," replied Willie. "A porpoise?" said Bill. "Ah, you know, a dolphin," said Willie. "Sometimes frightens the heck out of me. Dives across my bow, and I'm sure I'm going to hit him." "You can try, but those dolphins really know what they're doing," Bill replied. "If you had let him dive in close enough to you, you'd find that he'd come out from underneath going faster than you." "Is that right?" Willie said softly. "Yeah, next time just keep it steady and you watch what happens," Bill replied with authority. "But we're traveling much too fast for one of those," Willie objected. "You watch," Bill said with a grin. "They'll ride your wave and then come out in front of you." "Wow," said Willie. Bill's boat suddenly appeared in front of them. It was a strong, good-looking boat and well looked after. They turned in unison towards one another with a grin, as if to say, "Well, there she is." Willie approached alongside gently without any foolish movements, and this time demonstrated his skill in holding close without touching the craft. Bill easily reached up and hauled himself on board. As soon as Bill was safe, he waved back to Willie. Willie reversed away from the fishing boat, stood off at around 20 yards, and waited to make sure Bill was okay. Bill checked his boat out quickly, removed the covers from the control panel, and started the engines. The engines quickly burst into life, followed by the bilge pumps and the anchor winch. Bill stepped over to the side of his boat and waved Willie off. As soon as Bill's arm moved, the Voltage Special leapt out of the water and took off like something he could never imagine. He stood there and watched the amazing boat disappear into the distance. It was almost out of sight before Bill's anchor was fully pulled. Chapter 2. Bill moved back to the controls and started to head towards his favorite fishing field, then noticed that things had changed. He didn't understand what he was seeing, but it seemed like the foreshore had moved slightly. The whole place was different. He pulled back on the throttle and checked his maps, and sure enough, there had been a change on the far hills. The place where he normally lined himself up to head north was quite different to his map, and he could see a bit of smoke on the horizon. He knew that there was a volcano on the island, but it seemed like it had actually started to move things. Bill immediately decided that if the volcano had become active, there was probably some movement about to happen in the water, and it was not such a good idea to fish at that stage. The atmosphere held that familiar sense of caution, and within a few seconds, he realized that he must head straight back to the jetty as quickly as possible. For some reason, it was essential that he got the boat back in the safety of the bay. Bill pushed the throttle forward, and the inertia of the big boat made the engines grunt a little. The propellers stirred in the water before the boat moved, and it felt like there was too much delay. Bill suddenly realized that he had overdone the throttle and pulled back a little to feel the mass of the big vessel move with that familiar sense of power. As the movement became more positive, Bill pushed the throttle forward further and further, and as the bow wave grew higher, he pushed a little further, then stopped as he felt the boat start to lift and the engine load remained steady. The boat lifted and almost pushed itself to the stage where it would start to plane. He pushed the throttle to its maximum with little result. He knew that if he could get a tiny bit more thrust, his speed would increase immensely. So with full throttle, he set the automatic pilot and headed down to the engine room to see if he could get a little bit more out of the engines. The sense of urgency in Bill was abnormal as he rushed downstairs and into the engine room. He knew that he had been driven by something urgent, but had no idea what it was. His eyes were sharp and quick, and he immediately determined that he could get a fraction more on the fuel racks to push the engines along a little. As he made the final adjustment, the boat seemed to burst into life, and the speed from such a large vessel was more than he had ever expected. Bill's excitement rose quickly, and his sense of achievement made that more active as he raced upstairs to the control panel. After checking his direction and distance, he switched the radio on the local channel to pick up any chatter from neighboring vessels, but it was quiet. This was extremely unusual, as it was around the time when fishermen were starting to move and jockey for positions on their way out to their favorite fishing spots. He thought for a moment and quietly confirmed that his rush back to the jetty was somehow extremely important. It wasn't long before he could see the outcrop of rocks that he usually headed towards before he turned into the bay, and everything looked calm, but it felt a little eerie. He looked towards the other side of the island and could see more smoke. A little out from the island, he could see the white caps on the waves that seemed to come from nowhere. There was no major wind and there was no major tide change, so he knew there was some sort of activity that was abnormal. As he rounded the rocks into the bay, he could see the jetty. Then suddenly to his left, a massive wave appeared that was heading past the island and directly towards where he had been moored. It was like a single wave with lots of small waves breaking around it. It was something he'd heard about, but had never seen before. Without really checking how big it was, he knew he had to get well inside the bay because it was at least big enough to capsize his boat. As he moved into the bay, the wave broke around the northern heads with a massive crash, and spray flew hundreds of feet in the air. The amount of water that was moving towards Bill was frightening, and it looked like the boat would be totally destroyed in a matter of moments. The vessel's speed was high, but it didn't seem like it was going to be sufficient to take him to safety. With a sudden reflex, He pulled down hard on the wheel and headed in close to the rocks, reducing the distance between him and the safety of the bay. As the massive wave came towards him, he could feel the boat lift and accelerate. The mass of water suddenly took over. It was like riding a wave in the surf, and the big fishing vessel accelerated and pushed out in front of a wave all the way through the narrow inlet into the bay. Bill was shaking as he watched the wave crash against the southern heads and actually tear trees from the rocky surface. The wash from the tidal wave was enormous, and he saw his jetty disappear in the distance as the water lifted in the bay. Fortunately, the shape and the angle of the bay was such that the effect of the wave was dissipated quickly into the large bay, and it seemed like there was no major damage. Things got wet, but that was about all. As the wave went past Bill, Bill pulled back on the throttle and sat for a moment, trembling. He attempted to calm himself and could feel the perspiration oozing out of his body, even though he'd done very little work. As Bill sat there, relaxing and trying to be calm, the voice of Joe Montgomery rang out in his ears with great excitement. "Well done, Bill. What a beauty. Well done." Bill shook his head and said, "Is that you, Joe?" "I would have loved to have been there. That was a thriller," the voice continued. "Is that you, Joe?" Bill repeated. "Yes, of course. Who else?" "That was something, Bill," Joe replied. "Joe, what do you mean? Are you still hanging around out here?" Bill said quickly. "Every time you take the boat out, I'm with you. This is my life." "Who do you think told you about the wave coming? Who do you think sent the feeling to you that you had to move?" replied Joe with a genuine air of excitement. Bill wiped his brow and said, "Well, all I can say, Joe, is well done. If you hadn't pulled me out of there, I would have lost everything. You will always be okay, Bill. It's just that there are a few things happening around the place that require you to move when you're told, and you seem to be handling it pretty well." "So what was all that stuff about the fishing?" inquired Bill. "What else would Simeon tell you to get you moving?" Joe replied. Bill started to laugh to himself, and then he shook his head a little bit and thought, "If there was anybody looking on here, they'd think I'm crazy." Joe quickly replied to Bill's thought, "Well, I'm looking on, and I don't think you're crazy." Bill stood up and put his hands on his hips. "Is it possible for me to talk to you whenever I feel like it?" "Of course. I might not answer you, though," said Joe. "I thought so," said Bill. "So where do I go from here?" "Home. Go home, Bill," Joe replied, and the conversation ended. Suddenly, the feeling of excitement left Bill's body, and he realized that it was Joe who had been pushing him all the way. And that ends chapter 2, and I'll stop there. And when I return, we'll start with chapter 3 of The Magic of Life, Volume 2 by Robert Young. And until then, I wish everyone a perfect life, perfect health, and a magic future. Thank you.